Hello and welcome to the Week in Nintendo right here on GVG. This week, I'm your host, Steve Bowling. I'm joined by both Brandon Miracle and Daniel Alba. We've got a whole lot to discuss this week about the Switch 2, which sounds weird, but we did a video on the channel yesterday about Switch 2's Joy-Con 2 patent, and wouldn't you know it, as soon as we hit publish on that, a whole bunch more info came out. We have what may be a potential first look at the Switch 2's Pro Controller, AR functionality, and new info about the Joy-Con's gyroscopic functionality. It's going to be a huge show, so let's go ahead and dive right into things. But before we do that, Brandon, how are you?
I'm good. Some might even say I'm great.
That's good.
You know, it's a Nintendo world, and I'm just living in it.
Yeah, I recently got to take part of visiting Nintendo's world. That's where I got these crazy duds. I was in New York on a trip with my sister, and so of course I went to the Nintendo store and bought way too many things. It was a good week though. Daniel, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there. Jealous that you got to go see the man himself at the store, because I was there like maybe 6 months or so ago when I went to visit New York, and I'm just like, there's too many things there that I want to go back to and get.
You went to Mario's house.
Yeah, it's the store surprisingly didn't have any Switch 2 branding of any kind up. I actually was really expecting to see like maybe just a poster or something saying like Switch 2 is coming or just something, because these days every time I turn on my Switch, the top news story is the Switch 2 trailer even now. But surprisingly, Nintendo New York had nothing. But you're currently out in the Bay Area, Daniel, so you should be getting a House of Mario opening very close to you this year.
Yeah, there's supposed to be one opening up in San Francisco. There's no specific dates, but we know where it's going to be. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen, and if I'm even going to be in this area when that does happen. Because if I leave and they decide to drop a Nintendo store, I'll be very upset.
Yeah, I was going to say that feels like the type of karma that we get in this life, doesn't it? Like, you live in prime real estate to be able to visit a Nintendo store whenever you want, and it'll open only after you leave.
No. Please, Mario.
So let's go ahead and jump into the first bit of news, because yesterday on the channel we covered basically the confirmation that mouse mode is real. Japanese patents for the Switch 2 are kind of starting to come out and be made publicly available. So these aren't even leaks. These are just Nintendo's patent filings for the Switch 2 itself. And when we recorded yesterday, we had the broad patent of the hardware design of the Joy-Con, with some rough translations from Wario 64, just telling us that mouse mode was a real thing along with some illustrations. But people have dug further into those patents and found some interesting stuff about what we can expect from the Switch 2 at launch. The first is that it uses a 9-axis motion sensor. So to give you an idea, your typical 6-axis, which is what the PS3 controller was initially called, just gives you, left, right, tilt, pitch, this type of stuff. Like the standard, what we would call gyro in any game. A 9-axis controller gives you depth. So like it can detect whether you're moving the controller forward, backwards, closer, and into things. And that has some pretty serious implications for what the console itself might use that for. And with that, I'm going to toss it to you, Brandon. What do you think this 9-axis Joy-Con motion control is going to do for us?
Well, in general, it's going to improve overall functionality and accuracy, which is just generally a good thing. But like, if you look closer at the patents, there appears to be some AR shenanigans happening, perhaps even VR, judging by another one that seemingly shows a headset and sensors. But there's drawings here of them like picking up blocks with the Joy-Cons and arranging them. I'm guessing solving puzzles, building towers. So yeah, I think AR is probably on the table. However, the Switch 2 doesn't have a camera, but it does have a top USB-C port, which could potentially house a camera.
The top USB-C port on the Switch 2 remains a mystery to me. I've seen some people positing that Nintendo will release a second screen that will turn it into like a little DS, which is super cool as an idea. Like, it's something I desperately want. But I do wonder if they would do that, just because I imagine the price would be really, really high for something like that. That said, please do it. please give me back my DS. I think an AR camera makes a lot of sense, though, because you could essentially do that with a camera of almost any quality. I mean, if you go back and you play Face Raiders on the 3DS, you learn instantly that camera is like potato quality on that thing. Like, even in the brightest room, you'll see like artifacting on that camera. So I think it's plausible. I think this may actually happen.
The 3DS is an interesting thing to me. Like, why would they pursue AR now when they did it before? And like, it worked really well back then. But they didn't utilize it very much. So I'm curious why now. Like, we know AR obviously is becoming a bigger thing with, Apple's headset, the Vision Pro, and, Quest 3 having pass-through stuff. And I still don't really see what the use case is for Nintendo specifically.
That's definitely something that Nintendo just kind of toyed with the idea of. I'm not sure if they really wanted to commit, entire games to focus in on AR aspects. Like, that's why Face Raiders is just, like a little side application you'd play to kind of toy with all the newfangled technology that this thing has, using 3D, using AR functionality. But yeah, one of the things I remember that stuck out to me the most on the last episode of The Win was Brandon was telling you how, like, the Switch 2 is pretty much going to be, the base of the Switch 2 is what it is. Like, it's not going to try to do anything that would normally come connected with a new console, but with the USB port, that's where you have all your peripherals in. You can stick a camera, you can stick a second screen. That's probably what they're going to be focusing on here, and that's probably what's most likely it's going to be used for, because all these patents here, this is all stuff that, it's not going to be, not all of it's going to be like directly with the Switch 2 itself. It's going to be added on as time goes on, like with the headset that we're seeing there as well. So I can see them utilizing that at a later date, but it's definitely something that I can see them, expanding upon as the Switch 2 enters its life cycle proper.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the Switch 2 having, quote unquote gimmicks, but having those gimmicks be hardware extensions rather than something that exists as a unique piece of the console itself, like something that is forced upon the consumer or forced upon developers to use. I know that leads to lower adoption overall. Like, if you introduce a second screen or a camera as an optional accessory, then fewer people will use it because they can't guarantee that the customer base has it. But I think at the same time, you're able to set up just, you can get a bit more creative with the console in that way. So I think that we will see that. I think that was one of the best calls Brandon's made on the show so far, in terms of just, shouting out like stuff that Nintendo may do. Because I think there is that kind of, we saw a lot less of wacky Nintendo in the Switch 1 generation than I would have liked. The type of Nintendo that makes WarioWare. And I think that they're setting themselves up to be able to do that without having to design a whole console around it.
Yeah, because you get things like, for the Wii's a great example for this, right? You have the balance board, you have the wheel, you have other connections that you can make it an extension to the Wii remote itself. But it wasn't really something it wasn't focused on it entirely. Like, you still just had the core Wii remote to do all the functionality that most games will pertain to. And then now we have, all these different functionality options for the Switch 2 that we're looking at, with all these patents. So many different things that can lend, so many different possibilities, like with AR. So I guess they're going to go more all the feet first with AR this time around. And I'm curious to see where that leads.
Yeah, I'd like to see like how far they take it. One of the use cases that I wish was more interesting than it ended up being was they had the trading cards for Kid Icarus Uprising, and you could put them down and make them fight. And I'm like, why wasn't this more? This could have been a lot more than it was. They even like had extra packs. I don't remember the full count of cards in the end, but there were a lot. Like, they committed to the cards, just not to the game that they were attached to.
Now, I'm glad you brought up Kid Icarus, Brandon, because now that we know 100% that mouse mode is a thing on the Switch 2, where would you place the odds of Kid Icarus Uprising being remade for the Switch 2?
Oh, boy. This 100%. I'm going all in, baby. I think control scheme for Kid Icarus Uprising is one of the reasons we haven't seen it. And mouse mode would be a great utilization for Kid Icarus Uprising. Obviously, like, twin sticks and gyro is probably good. That's kind of what I was anticipating if the game were to have come to Switch 1. But having this additional option would be fantastic. It'd probably be the best way to play it overall.
I imagine that's going to be the case. I'm on the record as saying that, Kid Icarus Uprising on the 3DS just gave me hand cramps. So I never played a whole lot of it. As a lefty, I found it deeply uncomfortable to play. So I'm very hopeful because I've heard nothing but praise for it from people who are able to use the control scheme comfortably. So I really want to have the opportunity to play this game. And with Sakurai basically outwardly confirming that that's what he wanted to work on, and knowing the type of pull that he has within Nintendo, I'm pretty sure that if, he's one of the few people at Nintendo that can just say, this is what I want to do. And Nintendo's like, all right, here's your money, go make the game. I'd say he's part of an elite few who get to kind of dictate his own schedule in terms of what he's building, as long as, frankly, there isn't another Smash that needs to be made. So I do hope that he got the opportunity to do this, because I don't think Nintendo's working on new Smash right now.
Yeah, that's its own conversation. Kid Icarus Uprising is so ripe for a remaster to bring over, now more than ever, considering that this is an option that could be used and utilized so well. Anyone who's played Kid Icarus Uprising, they already know what it is to use the touchscreen, which obviously it worked as it was at the sacrificing your own hands to do so. The fact that they had to give you a tray to set your 3DS on to alleviate the pain that Nintendo knew you were going to have while playing this game. So much of that can be alleviated by different control schemes, and having one with controller and with mouse mode for whichever your preference is just so optimal. To think about what they would do with that.
Sakurai effectively made a Wii game for the 3DS. I still think about that. Why did he do that?
Yeah, you're looking at Sin and Punishment Star Successor, essentially, and that's pretty much what you're looking at here with this game. Thinking about how that would have worked with the Wii Remote as well, like that's like, oh, that actually works perfectly. And then now you can have, if you bring this back, now you have multiplayer again, and that's going to set up a whole bunch of whole new audience of people that get into Kid Icarus's multiplayer.
God, high school Brandon's coming back in full force when this releases.
It's going to be an interesting time, because I think a lot of people like me missed out on that game initially. But this surfaces a different aspect of the conversation for me. How prominent do we think mouse mode is going to be in games? Because obviously Nintendo is doing something big here. And I want to use this to jump off into our Pro Controller, because a patent for presumably, and again, we don't have any idea, but presumably a patent for the Pro Controller has surfaced, which shows that the Pro Controller is going to be a lot more similar to the Joy-Con than at least I initially thought. In the patent, we see a depiction of a controller with magnetic sides, but it's very clearly like a traditional controller with handles, a D-pad, analog sticks, but that it can snap in half, and that each side has its own optical mouse sensor inside. And this A couple episodes back, when we were covering the Switch 2 reveal, I posited that they would have a touchpad or something to replace, a mouse sensor. I honestly, in my wildest dreams, never thought that Nintendo would make a break apart Pro controller that would still have the mouse sensor that you would mouse around on a Surface with. So if this ends up being true, and again, somewhere between a pinch and a fistful of salt should be applied, because not every patent Nintendo does actually comes out in the way it's patented. If you go back to the Switch 1, the very first Switch patent was just an oblong screen with analog sticks shoved in the middle of it. So, again, be careful with taking these too literally. But I have to say, given the timing, I feel like there's accuracy to this, at least in terms of the feature set, because we're seeing this with very accurate renditions of the Joy-Con, or the Pro controller is more of a crude drawing. But I would be willing to bet that this thing will snap apart magnetically and have optical sensors in each side. And I'm betting Nintendo has some designs on that.
The possibility for this is really interesting to me. I like the idea of having a more comfortable controller be able to have mouse mode functionality. Just because, like, I look at the Joy-Con, and while I've futzed around with the current Joy-Con and, pretended like I was doing mouse mode, and it's comfortable enough, I don't know how well that would last, like, for a longer gaming session. For those who don't know, I use a vertical mouse for work. You hold it like this. It really helps with like arm pain and stuff like that. So for me, like, even holding a Joy-Con the way they show already is a little uncomfortable, because I'm just not used to using a mouse like that anymore. But if this Pro controller splits apart and it has that kind of like curved handle, I wonder if that would be a more comfortable option. And also, I'm worried that these two halves of the Pro controller won't snap onto the Switch. Please let them snap onto the Switch. I would love a first-party product that makes the Switch 2 more comfortable, so I don't have to buy a bajillion third-party pieces of plastic that make the Switch more comfortable.
I hadn't considered the angle of the... Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, no, I was just considering looking at the... Because I've held the Joy-Con in different ways and trying to figure out, like, at least this Joy-Con, how it would feel doing so. And it's just... The half of my hand kind of just misses that other thing to grip onto. So it feels like, how long would I be able to hold this for a while? There's definitely going to be some third party that's going to release a mouse, and you kind of like just slot this in, so it gives you that other half to hold onto. But it looks like with this Pro controller, it's kind of half solving that problem, where it does have more of a proper grip that a controller would have on that side, so that your index finger and your thumb can still comfortably rest on the rest of the controller. But as I look at it now, like, it looks kind of wacky still. I mean, this probably obviously isn't the final design, but I'm still wondering like how I would hold that. It's a bit of a hook when you look at it. So having it stay evenly on any flat surface is still... I just have to see it in action, or see what their final design is before determining anything further.
I would also hope that this doesn't deviate from the existing Pro controller design too much, because, it's a really comfortable controller. And I want to have an option like this for Switch 2 that isn't just my existing Pro controller.
Yeah, the Switch 2 Pro controller is going to be interesting. Obviously, the controller design in the patent is almost Ouya-like in nature, so I truly hope that we don't get a controller
PS3
that looks...
boomerang.
Yeah, it's But you can also tell from, like, if you look at the Switch 2 Joy-Con patent, it is extremely detailed, down to the last button. The little ring on the analog stick cap is drawn on. So it's very clear that Nintendo, was submitting something very final, whereas with this presumably Pro controller patent, they're showing off a crude idea as opposed to, a detailed schematic of an individual product. And I think that's because... oftentimes patents are scheduled to go live. Like they can say, hey, this one contains information we're not ready to show the public. Can you please not publish it until X date? So I'm guessing that this is just an initial patent that is related to how the technology in the Pro Controller mirrors that of the Joy-Con. And maybe they didn't have an option. I'm not enough of a lawyer to know, what the legalities are surrounding patents. But if I had to guess, we only got a Pro Controller patent because it relates in some way to the Joy-Con patent. I really like the idea, Brandon, and I hadn't considered that if you have a magnetic Pro Controller, you would be able to just snap the sides onto your Switch and then have a more comfortable experience if you want to settle in for like a longer play session in handheld mode, because I agree with you. I love the default design of the Switch. And looking at the Switch 2, I have the same feelings. Like, it looks really great. But in practice, over the years, when I have really gotten into, like, I'm locked in playing handheld mode, eventually I cramp. Like, my hands would cramp just from holding the Joy-Con because they are small. And you're supporting the weight of a console while gripping these tiny little controllers. It eventually gets uncomfortable. I ended up buying several different like larger Joy-Con to combat that, and I would usually, like, if I realized I was starting to cramp, I'd put those on. So Nintendo may be onto something there. I personally believe that if this is the route they're going, then they probably got the same feedback over the last decade, which was, hey, people with bigger hands have trouble holding this thing for extended periods. And you could easily combat that by just saying, hey, our Pro Controller now just docks on the side of the Switch when you want it to.
I mean, just look at the PlayStation Portal. They cut a DualSense in half and just slapped it on the two sides of that screen. So, like, it theoretically should work. We've got other consoles kind of doing that.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, no, I'm good. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting because when I look at things like the Steam Deck and the Portal, I consider them to be uncomfortable looking. Like, you look at them and you're like, that's going to make my hands hurt. I don't want to hold that. But, in the case particularly of the Portal, which I've spent a lot of time with over the last year, it's a very comfortable handheld to hold. The idea of taking an already great controller and just putting a screen in the middle of it actually works way better than I think people might believe looking at it for the first time.
Yeah, I also have a Nitro deck for my Switch, which mirrors the Steam Deck in a lot of ways in terms of ergonomics, and I find that supremely comfortable. Like, if I'm playing in handheld, it's always with my Nitro deck now. And as much as I love it, I would rather just have a baked-in solution from Nintendo that I don't have to go looking for a replacement for.
Yeah, I think
it's
go
definitely
ahead.
difficult to figure out like what is the optimal way to have this be ergonomically friendly and also functional. I too have a Steam Deck here as well, and I always thought, just looking at it, it doesn't look comfortable to have just because the joystick, the D-pad are so close to each other. The buttons, literally, the B button is like it's kind of melting off the side when you look at it real closely, and you know what? As I play it, it's not that uncomfortable. Like, once you actually start to play it, I played like a couple of games specifically for like a Metroidvania and whatnot. And it's surprisingly not really as uncomfortable as it seems. So I guess it just depends on the person, like what you're controlling and what you're using, whether or not it's like comfortable for your hands. But definitely there is a lot of improvements to be made on the Switch 2 on its Pro Controller. You can take some ideas, as you mentioned, with the Portal, and just slice it in half and put it that way, and then those separated sliced portions can still have the optical sensors on the inside.
Yeah, knowing Nintendo, like, it doesn't outwardly sound like an incredibly elegant solution, but, people thought the same thing about the Switch docking and undocking before we saw it in action. I'm willing to bet if this is something that they're actively working on, that it's going to work well.
Yeah, I feel like Nintendo has earned the benefit of the doubt from a hardware design perspective. And for what it's worth, what I've seen of the Switch 2, which is very little, it it looks just, like a better version of what we have, right? And I think my main gripes, at least so far, with the Switch, seem to be getting addressed. The kickstand, at least on this first version, is much better than the first run at a kickstand we got on the Switch 1. The screen is bigger, which is always a welcome improvement. And the Joy-Con attach magnetically, which I've had issues over the years with, like, the solidity of the connection between the Joy-Con and those metal rails on the sides of the console. So I'm excited that they figured this out, because I think that we're on track for something that, while it may feel quote unquote safe to some people, it still feels to me like it's a generational improvement in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think Nintendo has obviously put a lot of time and effort into the console's design. All the people who are like, oh, the Joy-Cons are the metal connector is going to break because you could just turn it and it would snap off. And I'm like, you are so dumb. Like, you think Nintendo would just let that happen?
We've been dealing with this sort of talk for so long. I remember back in the day when people were thought, oh no, the Game Boy Advance SP, you can just bend it and it'll break, and then what'll happen? And that doesn't happen. I don't hear anyone talking about their SPs that have been intentionally snapped in half or other such things. Because yeah, it has a little connector that's sticking out, but I don't think that's going to be like, it's going to be mostly with the Joy-Con in or docked anyways. There's not going to be many moments in which realistically you're going to have that separated and in touching it furiously to the point where you might be afraid it's going to be broken or anything. Like, there's a lot of testing that Nintendo and their engineers do for these sort of things beforehand.
The plastic that goes into the inserts on both sides of the Switch 2 do not allow for the movement that would allow the connector to break in the first place. And that's where I'm getting, like, frustrated with these people. I'm like, you could just look at it and see that it wouldn't be possible to break it.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that when a huge, like, mega corporation like Nintendo designs a piece of hardware like this, it's not like they just have one person, like, give it the thumbs up and then they make a million of them. They test these things in labs and, like, drop them and try to destroy them, and they have to pass, like, standard tests, to, like, they're not going to push out and be like, well, in one of 3 of these, this Joy-Con can be snapped off. Like, the risk has to be minimal for them, because Nintendo, like any company, is going to absorb warranty claim costs, and if they have Joy-Con that are just snapping off left and right, they're going to pay for those repairs, as part of the standard warranty. And it's worth noting that, of all the big 3, Nintendo has a well-earned reputation for producing the sturdiest hardware. Like, where were the red rings of death on Wii's? Like, what was going on there? I can say personally from experience, I have seen people abuse my Nintendo consoles in ways that made me think for sure they were broken, and I just pick it up and it's still working. Like, I remember my nephew dropping my 3DS, like, screen open face down on concrete, and being like, no, and then just picking it up and being like, oh, it's fine. Wow. So
yeah, Nintendo has a lot to lose for if they don't, like, ensure that the console hardware works. You could make the argument that they kind of dropped the ball on the Joy-Con with the Switch 1, but that's the Joy-Con. It's not the Switch. And the same applies here. Like, that metal connector comes out of the Switch 2. If that breaks, they're in big boy trouble. That's not gonna happen. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, before anyone comments, we know that, like, of course, as the Joy-Con themselves, they will drift, and they have drifted since early days. But the console itself, as Brandon's saying, the actual Switch, like, that's the bulk of where all of their testing comes into, because that thing needs to perform and stay performing for 5+ years that it's going to be out there in the markets. And yeah, if that were to break, then there's a lot. If that were to commonly break, rather, then that's going to be a lot bigger issue than what we've dealt with Joy-Con drift for the last 7-8 years now.
Do we think that Nintendo has resolved Joy-Con drift? Do we think that the Switch 2 is going to use Hall effect sticks?
I am willing to put money on it that they are. I said willing. That doesn't mean I'm going to. Let's be clear.
I really hope so, because that was one of the lingering pains for throughout the entire Switch generation, is people talking about having to pay $70, $80 for a new pair of Joy-Con, not even just for single ones. They had to always buy them in pairs because the left stick most commonly was the one to keep drifting, and you could send them in for a certain amount of time. They would replace it and bring it back to you, and it would work for some better than others. There's some people I know who've never really experienced Joy-Con drift with certain ones. Others, they get it like right away. It's just so inconsistent. But having Hall effect would alleviate that by a huge margin, and I think I would hope that they're going to look into that coming this generation.
Yeah, I've seen some people think that Nintendo was hinting at Hall effect joysticks in the Switch 2 reveal trailer when they showed the stick spinning. I don't think that was a hint of any kind. I think Nintendo was just like, well, we can't just show the sticks sitting there. So they had fun with the animation.
Hey, look, there's color underneath the sticks. Look at that.
Yeah, exactly. Like it wasn't a hint, guys. Not everything is a hint. I think the biggest hint in the Switch 2 trailer was mouse mode. But I think that there's a good chance, just like Brandon said, based on the cost alone of how many people likely sent Joy-Con in for drift. I'm one of the lucky few who did not experience it at all this generation. There was a different issue with Joy-Con early on in the Switch 1's life where, for whatever reason, the signal was not getting through to the console appropriately. And I did experience that on my very first pair of Joy-Con. But Nintendo, over the years, has done like stealth revisions to the Joy-Con to fix various smaller things. It's amazing to me that they never did a stealth revision to introduce Hall effect joysticks. Just feels like an easy one for them to do, but far be it from me to tell Nintendo what to do. But I would say that, obviously the number of people who had this issue and the fact that Nintendo publicly acknowledged Joy-Con drift, which is a big thing for any company to do, to say, hey, there's a design flaw in this product we've had on the market, means that I would be willing to bet that, I'm with Brandon. They likely have changed up to Hall effect sticks to avoid exactly this, because whether you address it or not, it's a bad look for a company to say, hey, we designed this controller and we recognize there's a major flaw in it, and we'll eat the cost of fixing them for you for free because we messed up this bad. So I think that Nintendo would likely, even if it costs more money, would want to avoid that PR issue, if anything else.
And I mean, people are still going to buy extra Joy-Con. There will be special editions. There'll be alternate colors. You have Per Schneider with his House of 1,000 Joy-Cons. People will buy additional Joy-Cons. I don't think they need to worry about that. Just make sure they work. That's bottom line.
Is now a good time to say I have as many as Per Schneider does? I just don't display them.
The second House of 1,000 Joy-Con.
I literally have bought every variation of Joy-Con that exists. I don't know why, but I'm absolutely the guy you're talking about.
You got to paint your walls with those.
I honestly am going to do something. I think once Switch 2 launches, I might frame the vast majority of my Switch 1 Joy-Con like in a glass box or something and put them on the wall somewhere, just because
you gotta install a railing on that bookshelf behind you, like on the underside, and just slot them in all the way across.
There's something. I'll create some type of interactive art installation with my Joy-Con.
It was so annoying to me whenever they released Joy-Con, and it's like there was like two sets of different colors, and like they complement each other's colors, so you have to like buy both so that you can get the color that you want with the opposite side Joy-Con. I'm just like, god dang it, I just want to buy them individually, please. Do you think they'll do that this generation? Can you buy individual Joy-Con at this point?
It's a good question, because in Japan you can buy individual Joy-Con. So it's strictly a North American thing that we can't. Like, we have to buy them in pairs. And I think if you go to Nintendo's like parts website, here in the States, you can buy a single left or right Joy-Con to replace presumably a broken one.
Isn't it like $50 to buy a single?
It's more expensive to buy an individual Joy-Con for no good reason. But I feel you, because there are some Japan only have an allegory here in the US, like famously with the Splatoon green and pink. I don't remember which color combo we got in the US, but like the left and right versions were made available, but their mirror versions weren't sold here. So you had to go to Japan to get like the left pink Joy-Con or something like that.
Yes.
Even though, you know, they could have brought them over. They just chose not to.
I remember. Yeah, I totally remember there were some people clamoring about how they want to have a complete set of green or pink, so they had to import the
Yep.
opposite sides. Yeah, I remember
I
that.
had to find the package in Japan that was the mirror opposite of the one they sold in the US. Because in Japan, you could just buy either or. But in America, they're like, no, we're going to make this really hard. And then there were the Mario Red Joy-Con that were only sold with a Switch. Like if you bought it, same with the Pokemon Let's Go Joy-Con. You just, for some reason, Nintendo in America was like, we're not going to, you're going to have to get a whole console for these. Where in Japan, they're like, just hop online, you can buy them. We'll just let you buy them.
I was so happy when I bought my Switch OLED and I got 2 white Joy-Con. Same with the Tears of the Kingdom special edition. They don't look exactly the same, but they're a matching set. You know, I thought Nintendo was bold when the Switch 1 came out and the 2 Joy-Cons were not the same color in the neon set. I thought that was a good idea, just because it was weird. And they're still technically doing that with the Switch 2 Joy-Con, just because it's just not as prevalent because the colors are inverted. But I don't think it'll be as much of a problem this time around because of that fact. I'm also curious, like, what they're planning to do, because the Switch 2 is color coordinated on the railings. Are we just going to have Joy-Con that don't match that? What happens there?
Yeah, that's the big thing. Because is the left always going to be blue interior and the right side will be like it's like reddish salmon color on the interior all the time? Like, I wonder how they're going to do color variants with the Switch 2. I'm sure there'll be ones where the entire casing is colored, but are they going to focus more on just that railing part and underneath the joysticks this time around?
Is it color changing plastic? Is there some weirdo superpower thing that the Switch 2 can do to change its colors?
It's a really good question. And I think that Nintendo is likely going to stick with the railing color, because red and blue are the traditional polar colors for magnets. And so
Yeah.
it kind of says like, hey, this magnet goes here, which honestly, I don't think they really needed to do, because I would wager very good money that you physically cannot attach Joy-Con in the wrong direction because of the magnetic polarity. Like if you've ever tried to stick 2 magnets together in the wrong way,
Right.
they will just repel each other. That's how magnetism works. And so I'm guessing that, you know, if you've got like a 5-year-old and they take your Joy-Con off and try to put them on the wrong sides, they just physically like won't, you know, it won't go, which is great because people did attach the Joy-Con the wrong way on the original Switch, which was very funny because I think IGN did it like on their very first Switch video. Like they put them on backwards and had to like hammer them off the sides. But I think that, so they probably put it there just as a way of being like, hey, you know, customer, this is where these go. Red goes with red, blue goes with blue. Please don't break this. But I think as the Switch 2 becomes more ubiquitous, we'll get special editions that just kind of get willy-nilly with the colors. You know, we had the red and blue and gray at launch with the original Switch. I think we'll just see, you know, Nintendo will have a standard colorway or two, and then they'll just get crazy with it as time goes on.
I'll be first to say it. Those gray Joy-Con are ugly. Why they look like that?
I initially thought I wanted them when I got the Switch. So to be clear, when Nintendo sent me my review unit for the Switch, it's not like they reached out and said, "Hey, what color do you want?" I just got whatever they sent, and so I was puzzling over it when I found out they were sending me one. And I was like, "Which do I really want?" And I sold myself on wanting the gray. I was like, "Oh, I want gray. Like it just looks like a standard console. It doesn't stick out." Nintendo sent me the red and blue, which makes sense because that defined the Switch's look. And I fell in love with it the instant I saw it in person. I was like, oh, this is this is really cool. I can't believe I almost went with gray, but the one Joy-Con, I'm interested to see this because these are all going to be much more uniform, like black with a pop of color. I think that's really cool, and it's the one Joy-Con color we never got officially. Like Nintendo, for whatever reason, didn't want to give us black Joy-Con for the last decade.
Yeah, I'm the one of the people that got the gray, and ever since then, it's weird to have both Joy-Con be the same color. I appreciate the asymmetrical look of them, no matter what it is, whether it's the Zelda one for Tears of the Kingdom, whether it's just two different colors, the pastels for the Animal Crossing New Horizons edition, for example. Yeah, it just feels like it's the Switch's identity now. It's a subtle thing, but it matters a lot in its own branding and helps it stand out against all the other, now handheld gaming devices that we see, like the Steam Deck and whatnot out there.
I have a bone to pick real quick. You're talking about special editions, and whoever's in charge of doing the Super Smash Brothers special editions for anything, can you please stop making everything so ugly? Like, why are they so ugly? The Switch Smash Joy-Cons are ugly.
You don't like having two lines going down and across the Joy-Con?
I do not. I don't like the Pro Controller, and I don't like the dock. Someone really dropped the ball on that. Rant over.
It felt very rushed. Like they were like, hey, we need a special edition. And someone was like, I'll grab the key art off the site and throw it on stuff.
And they went,
they're like, there you go.
There you go. It's done.
You look at that Tears of the Kingdom special edition OLED dock and you're like, dang, that's sexy. You look at the Switch 1 Smash Ultimate dock and you're like, dang, that's not sexy.
That's ugly.
Yeah, Smash fans have been done dirty because obviously a really nice special edition Smash console would have done numbers. It would have sold very well and probably been regarded as one of the best special edition consoles that they had made. It's just unfortunate that they just kind of took the existing art and just like all over everything.
Let me design it, Nintendo. I'll take whenever we give an official Pro Controller design, I'll design something for that, and then Nintendo will know what they should have done.
There we go. As soon as we figure out what the Pro Controller is and what it's going to look like, before we jump into our mailbag, do we think that there's any more hidden stuff about the Pro Controller? Like, why would Nintendo not be showing this yet, especially if patents are now getting published for it?
Perhaps there is a headphone jack on there, and they don't want to talk about voice chat yet.
That is a very solid guess. I think that, the C button is obviously still not being detailed in the patents, which, to be fair, I don't think they need to, because that is a software function and not a feature of the hardware. Like the C button, I don't think does anything locally within the Joy-Con. I think you, like any other button, you push it and it makes something happen on the console. So Nintendo doesn't need to say like, oh, hey, we have a C button. Because I saw some people saying like, curious that the C button's not there. I don't think it is. I think it's because Nintendo doesn't need to describe in their patent how a standard button functions. Like, I don't think it mutes or unmutes a mic in the Joy-Con, for example. I think whatever it does is related to the OS on the system. And so they didn't have to describe what it does, because you can't patent in a hardware patent what a button does in software. Like, if there's some unique feature, Nintendo will have filed that patent along with whatever Switch 2 OS, patents they have. So I don't think it's curious that it's missing. I think it's just Nintendo is not ready to talk about it. So we'll find out more about that in April.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Switch 2 headphone jack is almost certain.
The only other thing, I'm not sure if anybody else has seen it lately, because it happened with the other pads. It was kind of buried in there. Joy-Con, at least one of the Joy-Con controllers, will also have NFC in it. You can use Amiibo with these as well. It's in one of the sides. And whatever it's going to be used for, if Amiibo aren't dead, I guess. I was totally just expecting them to just, you connect your old Joy-Con to the Switch 2 and just use that NFC chip. But if they're applying it to the actual controller, then I guess there's still more plans for it in the future.
I think because it's such a core function to some Switch games, like Breath of the Wild in particular, used Amiibo to good effect, I'll say. My big hope, though, my pie in the sky dream, because all the comments on our MouseCon video were about Super Mario Maker 3. And my hope is that Super Mario Maker 3A does happen. I desperately want it to happen now that we have a viable control scheme to play it on a TV. And 2, that if it does happen, it's a true return to form in that all that Amiibo functionality comes back. I desperately want that. Like, give me every single, Amiibo costume in Super Mario Maker. Let me play Mega Man again. Let me play Sonic again. Like, that to me would be incredible. And it's something I desperately want to happen. But outside of that, I still question the viability of Amiibo in 2025. I think that it's going to be, because right now it seems like Nintendo's in a pattern where they just reprint Amiibo for games that are coming, but they're not really announcing a whole lot of new ones. And when we do get Amiibo functionality in a new game, it's terrible. Like, the Amiibo functionality has been bad for a while in new stuff.
I think it was pretty interesting and telling that there were no Amiibo made for Super Mario Brothers Wonder. The only games really getting Amiibo these days are like Zelda. Like, every Zelda game gets an Amiibo of some kind. Tears of the Kingdom got the 3. Skyward Sword got Loftwing and Zelda.
They had all the opportunity to make one to complement Toy Link with Echoes of Wisdom, but they didn't make a Zelda for Echoes of Wisdom.
They didn't. You're right.
Your argument is broken, Brandon. I've broken through. And I'm
I can't believe
again.
this.
So I think the watershed moment for Amiibo's future will be Metroid Prime 4. If we don't get an Amiibo for Metroid Prime 4, I think it's safe to say that Amiibo are at best on life support. Like, we might get some here and there, like new ones, but it definitely feels to me like Nintendo is slowly backing away from them.
Yeah.
Whenever I go to GameStop, the Amiibo selection's always so weird. It's just a bunch of unrelated Amiibo that I haven't seen in 8 years.
I was waiting to see, because another series that has kind of been consistent with Amiibo is Xenoblade. We have Shulk. We kind of have Xenoblade 2 with Pyra and Mythra with Smash Brothers, and we have the Noah and Mio for 3. And if there was one for Elma for Xenoblade Chronicles X, that would have made sense as well. But I guess we're not going in that direction at this point in time.
Amiibo releases have also been really weird, like weirdly delayed after the game comes out. Like, it used to be that Amiibo for a game launched day and date with that game. Like, you could go to the store, get the whole Amiibo collection if you wanted along with the game. But Nintendo almost seems to intentionally be delaying them to a point where the interest will be as low as possible, because, some of those Smash Amiibo came out like a year after the character arrived in the game. Sora, I remember, took an incredibly long time to come out. And we're seeing stuff like, Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda and Ganondorf, like 2 very obvious choices for Amiibo, took a really long time to come to market. So I think Nintendo is just almost intentionally like shooting Amiibo in the foot to just keep people like lower interest. Maybe, I don't know if they're just not selling well enough, or if it's just something Nintendo has lost interest in doing because the development effort isn't worth it to sell plastic figures. I'm really not sure, because personally I still love them. Like, when a new one comes out, I pick it up, but it feels like Nintendo doesn't want me to.
Yeah, the whole thing is very odd. Like, I'll be sad if Amiibo do stop happening, because it offers a chance for some of these franchises that don't get merch or figures or statues or anything like that to get stuff. I wouldn't have been sad if Tears of the Kingdom hadn't gotten Amiibo, because we have those beautiful Figma statues coming out, or figures, of all 3 of those characters. But, Noah and Mio, they're not going to get anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of representation in series that are only there because of Amiibo, and everyone that's has as somebody who has all of Smash Brothers Amiibo set, I'm pretty much set for life. I'm only picking up ones that I really like if I see them out there at this point. But yeah, it's kind of just the prime era of that has passed us, and it's kind of sad to see them really slow down on it. But I mean, who knows if they're keeping NFC and the Switch 2 controller? Maybe they have something planned for some kind of resurgence on them. Who knows at this point?
I truly hope so. I think it would be really cool to see Amiibo make a big comeback. I'm not going to hold my breath because I feel like Nintendo's trying to tell us something, but I agree that if we got that, it would be really cool. And who knows, we speculated about a Fire Emblem coming out in the next Direct, whenever that is. If the rumor is true and we get a Direct this month, Fire Emblem might be on the board. And Fire Emblem has a pretty good track record with Amiibo as well. Like getting Amiibo released for games. I think Engage is the only one that didn't really get an Amiibo, right? They didn't do anything for Engage.
There was nothing for Three Houses either.
Yeah, I didn't think
You're
there was.
right.
Yeah.
So they had a line for Shadows of Valentia with Celica and Alm, and they had Crom and Young Tiki as well, because that was kind of around the time that Fire Emblem Warriors was coming out. They have functionality in that game, but they never continued that series. There's this specific base is for Fire Emblem, and they never used it again after that, and they should have for multiple reasons. I know so many people that would have gotten a Edelgard or Claude Amiibo right away, but that didn't happen.
I'd have like 17 Claudes. Yeah, that's super weird. But the last Fire Emblem remake was under the Echoes name. I'm curious if they continue that, and I don't know. It's a weird association, but just because it's called Echoes, maybe they'll have more Amiibo.
Oh man, give me that Sigurd on his horse. That's iconic for a genealogy of the Holy War. Oh man, I hope so.
I would love to see more Amiibo, particularly because it's cool to get Zelda stuff, but like Brandon said, there's loads of Zelda merch out there. I can get Zelda merch in probably a million different ways compared to most of Nintendo's franchises.
Not just like Zelda merch though, like really good Zelda merch.
That's fair. That's a good distinction. I can get high quality Zelda merchandise. I can run into a bodega in New York and find a Tom Nook stuffy that looks terrible. But
you and I both have that Proplica Master Sword, the gorgeous replica.
Right back here. I mean, I've also got one made of actual metal. people just be making Zelda stuff out there, but I would love to see Nintendo continue these for the sake of franchises that don't get their due from that perspective, like Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem is full of really nice character designs, really great world building. It deserves the shine that other bigger franchises in Nintendo's library get. So Amiibo is a nice vehicle for that.
I mean, third-party games and even some indies have gotten Amiibo. Like I have a bunch of Monster Hunter Amiibo. In what world would that have ever happened?
That's true. Nintendo's not really in the business of making Capcom figures usually.
Yeah. There's a Shovel Knight Amiibo too. Like that's crazy.
And the other knights that have their own campaigns as well. That was amazing to see. There's like Golden Shovel Knight. They went all out for Yacht Club in particular.
You see, Nintendo, you're not the only ones benefiting from these Amiibo. You gotta spread the love. You gotta share it.
Indeed. I want Amiibo to continue, but with that, let's go ahead and jump into our mailbag. And if you don't know, you can join our winner's circle over at patreon.com/GVGaming, where for as little as $5 a month, you get early access to each and every episode of The Week in Nintendo. But you also get to submit topics for us to discuss right here on the show. And I'm going to jump in with this one from Amareg, who writes, with Labo VR having Nintendo experiment with the most basic of VR, what are your thoughts on the idea of Nintendo going deeper with the idea and having Switch 2 have its own dedicated VR headset that is not as expensive as MetaQuest or PSVR, but powerful enough to give us unique Nintendo experiences in the format? Well, I mean, we touched on this at the top of the show. It's not entirely impossible because the AR concepts outlined in the patent also show somebody wearing like a headset of some kind. I don't think Nintendo is going to go the full PSVR or even MetaQuest route because, PSVR 2 has been, unfortunately, a disaster for Sony. It's too expensive. People aren't buying it. It requires, setup that, frankly, people don't want to do. What I could see is something more akin to like the Meta glasses or something like that, where it's just like, you can still see out into the area around you, but it projects AR elements directly onto your eyes, right? Like you put your Switch in the dock, maybe these glass type things connect wirelessly to it, and they let you walk around, and instead of plugging like a webcam into the top of the Switch too, so that you don't have to hold the console, you have the cameras built in on this thing, and it just maybe makes things appear in front of you. You use the Joy-Con as your controllers, and you can interact with the environment. At least that is my approximation of what we saw in the patent.
I would love Nintendo to explore this more. I am wary that they would go like all the way in, full dive. I do think AR is probably the more likely scenario. There are some Nintendo experiences I'd like to see in VR. Like I think Luigi's Mansion would be incredible as a VR game. Or Metroid Prime 4, for instance. But like I think I see more potential with AR. I was sitting here thinking like one of the experiences I've always wanted to have with AR or VR is like I want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! I want to put the card down and I want my monster to appear. And I'm like, well, Nintendo doesn't really have a card game. And then it hit me in the side of the head. I'm like, duh. Pokemon Company could do that. Why not have AR Pokemon TCG and just use your Switch as the means to an end? That would be sick.
Yeah, imagine something as simple as us linking an account from TCG Pocket, for example, and now you have the monsters, the Pokemon just showing up from the card as you play them, or when they do an attack, for example. That seems like the kind of little things that they would do to, enhance the experience of a game that they already have available to you. Because as you're saying, I would always, in an ideal world, imagine like there's a commercial where someone has an AR headset or a VR headset or something, and when they put it over their head, all of a sudden it flips the image to them having the Samus helmet on, and that's how they start a commercial, for example, doing Metroid Prime 4 in VR, which would be incredible. That would probably be the first time I ever even try VR at that point. But yeah, and then with Luigi's Mansion, like, Luigi's Mansion already had its like 3D roots from all the way back on the GameCube, in which they wanted to implement that way. So having that immersion with certain series would benefit it so much. But given what Nintendo is known to do, I feel like they wouldn't go all in quite like that as we hoped they would.
Yeah, I feel like VR is probably a step too far for them even now. There are some issues that are fundamental to games in VR that nobody has really solved for yet, that require probably a lot of money on the part of the end user. Like locomotion in VR games is still really hard. The act of walking in VR is difficult. If you're prone to motion sickness, that is the easiest way to get yourself sick, is using an analog stick to walk around in a VR space. So I don't know that because Nintendo is clearly still not trying to win like the big tech battle, and with VR, you open yourself up to a lot of like, wow, look how bad these games look in VR on Switch 2, because VR requires that games run at between 90 and 120 FPS and to be rendered twice. So I just think that that's asking for a lot of horsepower from the Switch too, even though we know it'll be more powerful. I mean, Breath of the Wild ran at like 5 to 10 FPS in VR on the current model of the Switch. It was gut-wrenching. But I think AR still has that kind of magical quality to it. where, you know, you see like a table in your room and then suddenly like a Mario stage appears out of it, and you can run around and interact with stuff. Or, you know, I've seen implementations of AR where you're controlling a little character who you can make him jump on things that exist in your house, and it knows well enough, like, hey, this surface is raised up, and you could make a little guy run across it. If Nintendo was able to do something like that, I think it would just increase the wow factor of the Switch 2, rather than have people pointing out how it's, you know, technically flawed or whatever.
The first like Nintendo first party game that came to mind for AR is Captain Toad.
Oh, like, Captain Toad in AR would be incredible.
Like that, it just feels like it was designed for that.
Yeah.
Just like imagine Captain Toad and the whole stage on your table, and instead of turning the stage, you are turning yourself as you just walk around and try and peek behind corners and see what's hiding.
There are a lot of Nintendo franchises that could benefit from that. For me, now that you've said that, one of the ones that comes to mind is Yoshi's Woolly World. Because those were quite famously designed as real world dioramas, you know, and they wanted to give that impression. If you as the player were sitting outside the diorama, you could, like you said, look around, get a sense of depth for it, figure out where the secret routes might be, literally by looking at the map from different perspectives. I really like that idea. I would love to see Nintendo implement something like this, but I have to put forward the huge caveat that this is Nintendo, and they are a very technologically risk-averse company. And so I wonder if this is something like they want to do, but not necessarily something they will do right away.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, because like right now Nintendo wants to stay a bit more iterative than, and we already have seen that with the Switch 2's design and its model. Like, I'm sure they'll feel confident enough to do their crazy things like their Labos and whatnot down the line. But as it stands right now, like, just keep it as quote unquote pure as you can for getting the people, the initial crowd hooked in to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You don't want to mix up the messaging on what the Switch 2 is by introducing something like an AR headset right away. They don't want people having a Wii U situation where they don't know if the headset or the console is the new thing. I think Nintendo's done a good job so far, but I do think they risk muddying the message significantly by introducing too many like peripherals right at the start. I think these will be things they roll out over time. Moving on to our next mailbag item. I thought this one was interesting given recent events in the industry. Son of a Fitch writes, since the ESA is working on another conference, iIcon, and Nintendo is a part of it, do you think this could be the return of seeing Nintendo up on stage presenting, or just having booths with playable demos as they have at these conferences? And no, unfortunately. So if you're unaware, iIcon is the, people are labeling it as the spiritual successor to E3, but the reality is that it's going to be nothing like E3. This is a closed industry event. And when I say closed industry event, I mean that people like us, the three of us on this panel, are not invited. We're not the intended audience for this type of event. So E3 at its zenith, when I met Brandon, honestly, best E3 I've been to, was an industry only event that the industry only was in big old air quotes by that time. There were plenty of ways to get in that didn't require like a real credential to the industry. You know, I saw children at E3. I saw people who definitely weren't old enough to have jobs at E3. And it was always more of a who you knew. But that was largely due to the fact that media, folks like us, were allowed into the show, because you could be credentialed media without necessarily being of age even. And this is strictly for like business to business marketing opportunities or networking opportunities. So let's say that you've got a game that you want to pitch to Nintendo. Like you're a developer, you're working on something, you think Nintendo might want to publish it. This would be really an event for making that connection, for making connections between big and small publishers and developers. and giving like very business heavy, business related talks about the games industry.
These are people seeking publishers and investors, and like it's not meant for us. This is pie charts and graphs.
Not really the fun side that we're used to going to E3. It's more the business technical stuff that we're not really as accustomed to or know the language of as fluently as these people do.
Or quite frankly, interested in.
Yeah, exactly. This is meant to be the dry stuff. So, one thing, a story that I've relayed a few times on the channel here is that I was in the room like when Star Fox got into Starlink, that I happened to be like in the room when that deal was being negotiated. I was being shown Starlink at E3, and this was a pre-Star Fox build of Starlink. And as I'm in this room, like sitting with like a single developer from Ubisoft, into that same room walks Reggie, Bill Trinan, and Shigeru Miyamoto to sit down to talk about Starlink. And I was like, what's happening there? And then I was summarily removed from the room. I was supposed to be there. It's just when something like that happens, they're like, yeah, you should leave. Goodbye. And so Ubisoft understandably removed me from the demo. But the other part of E3 was that stuff like that happened. It was a vehicle for big publishers and developers to talk to one another about potential collaborations or showing off new hardware behind closed doors. And that is still a vital part of what the industry needs that doesn't exist at anything currently. So it makes sense to me that members of the ESA, of which Nintendo is one, probably approached them and said, we still need that. Like, that has to happen. That's vital to our business. And so the ESA, resurrected that piece of E3 as something new. And I don't think media will ever be invited to that, because there's no way they would want to have someone like us in the room when they're making plans like that.
The closest adjacent right now is probably GDC.
Yeah, exactly. GDC is the closest thing to it. But even that is more focused on the technical side of things, not the business side, right? Like people talking about how to make games. I don't think this signals a return to presentations for Nintendo. I think if anything, this year is really the proving ground for how Nintendo views those types of events, because while there is a need to have media go hands-on with your games and to, A, provide feedback, and B, help to get info about these games out into the mainstream, shows like E3 cost Nintendo probably orders of magnitude more than just grabbing a handful of selected media and bringing them somewhere to play it. Like, even if you consider that you're flying people out from all over the country and all over the world, it costs maybe 1% of what it does to have a booth at a place like E3.
Yeah, I don't really see the need. I mean, look at Switch 2. They're doing the big Nintendo Direct, and last time they did a stage show. I don't see why they would. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate on my end because I never really got to see an E3, and I don't think I ever will. But as far as like just showcasing what you have, shows like GDC, shows like the Game Awards will be the ones where we see, major new developments for these sort of things. GDC is the one where we're most likely able to interact with that ourselves. And yeah, I mean, we get that big news in other ways and methods now from state of plays, from your directs and everything. So this sort of thing it's a lot more, as we mentioned, it's a lot more business. So it's not something that we're really going to be invited or involved with at any point in time.
Right. And I think it should be that way for the record. I think E3 has basically become two things. I think that Summer Game Fest is the media side of E3 these days. And this new icon, or somebody will come up with a better name, but that will be the biz dev, the business development side of what E3 was. And I think that those two shows are going to serve those two very different market needs. But thank you for the question. Let's get one last one in before the end of the show here. We've got one from Wataniac, who writes, how much do you all use back compat on your PS5? Do you think your usage ratio might be similar with the Switch 2? And I use backwards compatibility very rarely on my PS5, if only because there are new PS5 games coming out all the time that I feel like I need to play. But I think that I will use backwards compatibility quite a bit more on the Switch. And the reason is that the PS4 ran games just fine, largely speaking. Like most of the first party stuff ran acceptably well on the PS4 and PS4 Pro. So I didn't have any curiosity going into the PS5 generation of like, hey, how do these old games run? Because I wasn't fully happy with how they ran on the PS4. Whereas with the Switch, I think going back as far as Breath of the Wild, there are points where you're like, the game would drop here a lot. Like when you get the Master Sword, the frame rate can be distracting. There are technical issues on many more games. In fact, strictly speaking about Age of Calamity, I just dropped that game because of how poorly it ran. It ran so badly that I just didn't want to finish it. And at the time, I assumed that there was a Switch Pro around the corner that would fix it for me and I could finish. Now with the Switch 2 being a thing, there are a lot of games I'll want to go back and just revisit them because they presumably will look better and run better. And to me, getting that experience from a Nintendo first party title is something that has previously only existed in the realm of emulation. And so it'll be really cool to see Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Age of Calamity looking and running better than ever before without having to step outside of Nintendo's ecosystem to do it.
I think it was pretty telling even when NSO started and those games being emulated were in HD. They didn't do that on Wii U. They didn't do any upscaling on Wii. Nintendo clearly cares enough about making sure that the performance is increased today than they did back then. I'm pretty much in agreement with you. My PS5, I don't play a ton of PS4 games on it. However, I don't have a PS4 plugged in. So if I'm going to play a PS4 game, it will be on my PS5. And the same will be true of Switch 2. I'm just not going to have my Switch plugged in or ready to go. It's just going to be my Switch 2. That's my Switch now.
Yeah, I think the one game I feel like I did the most with anything sort of backwards compatibility with would be Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like I put my PS4 disc into the PS5 after I figured out which way it goes in because that was very confusing to me. And like there was a whole process to get that on there because I wanted to also download Integrate at the time, and you had to have that in there, and it was a headache also because my PS5 had died in the middle of that, so I had to redo it all over again once it came back from repairs, and it was just as annoying the second time as it was the first time to get it all sorted together. And I don't know. I mean, I know that's a unique case with certain games, but it's just kind of a hassle. So I don't really have any other experience with backwards compatibility with the PS5. And I see myself doing this a lot more, like what everyone else is saying with the Switch 2. Like, I'm very curious to see how that functions, how certain games will perform being on more powerful hardware. And that's just something I value a lot more now because, like, my PS4 is just kind of sitting over there somewhere. There's a couple of games I would probably play on it that I could if I really wanted to. But at this point, I'm just pretty much sticking with just PS5 and just whatever the newest console is, whether it's going to be Switch 2 in hopefully less than half a year to go. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you guys in that I feel like there will not be a whole lot of Switch 1 usage after the Switch 2 drops. Like, we already know that not every game will work, and I'll be keen to see what those games are. I'm with John in that I think it's just the IR camera games or something similar like that, or even games that physically don't fit, like Labo VR, right? Which technically doesn't work on the OLED already. So I think that that's going to be what we see as the main issue there. But I can't imagine it'll be so many games that I'll have to keep my Switch 1 charged and at the ready. I think it's going to be a tiny handful of games that don't work, or maybe the publishers have gone under and so the game can't be republished or something like that. But I'm really anticipating that the Switch 2 will just fill in the Switch 1 spot in my gaming setup the same way the PS5 did with the PS4, because I also took my PS4 out of rotation the minute my PS5 showed up. In fact, I'm already hoping that Nintendo sells extra docks with the Switch 2 so that I can put them on the other TVs in my house, because obviously I'll get the one, and then, you know, I've got more than one TV, so I would hate to be just stuck playing docked mode, or worse yet, having to move my dock around the house to play.
I'm gonna need
my
like
hope is that
four
they
in
do
my
that.
house, just off the top of my head, and I'm like, I don't want to. Just make it easy.
Yeah, you know, I have exactly 4 as well. Now that I think about it, I've got 1 upstairs, 2 in my game room, and 1 in my office, and that is it. Like, that's where everything. And I really don't want to have to be like, well, we can only play on this one TV because that's the one dock we got. But yeah, so I hope Nintendo sells them, and I hope that they're not like $80 like they were. The Switch 1 dock pricing was crazy once you figured out what was inside. It's like a little board like this and a bunch of plastic, and they're like, that will be $80.
God.
All right, that's going to do it for us. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're here on YouTube or listening, if you're on any of those podcast services around the world, this is the end of this episode of The Week in Nintendo for February 8th, 2025. Thanks to my co-hosts, Brandon and Daniel, for joining me to talk about so much more Switch 2 stuff than I thought we'd have available. If you'd like to support us and get each episode of The Week in Nintendo early, you can do so over at patreon.com/gvgaming for just $5. But this is the end. We'll see you next week. I hope you guys are happy, safe, and healthy wherever you are. And we'll see you next week. Until then, bye.
Bye.
Till we meet again.
This jacket makes a shaky sound when I wave.